Welcome back to day 2 of the cutting edge stage at CogX 2021. I'm your MC, Jess Wade, a research fellow at Imperial College London. Please remember to share your thoughts and ideas on social media using the hashtag CogX 2021. Next, we're going somewhere that you may not expect: the use of AI to drive early adaptation and adoption of tech to support health in clinical and commercial contexts. To help us understand this dynamic and evolving field, we're joined by Giuseppe Sollazzo, Head of AI Skunkworks and Deployment at NHSX. Giuseppe was previously Head of Data at the Department for Transport. Alongside Giuseppe is Niamh McKenna, Chief Information Officer at NHS Resolution, who wants to enhance the tech capacity of the Department of Health and Social Care, and Roddis, Digital Director of the NHS Foundation Trust. Over to you, Giuseppe.
Well, hello, good morning, and greetings from the Skunkworks bunker. I've introduced myself, Head of AI Skunkworks in the NHS AI Lab, and this session is all about exploring the work we do behind this sort of hipsterish name. This session is basically going to be fundamentally a conversation with my two guests, people who have worked with us, and of course we'll open the floor to the questions. You should see my slides, but before we start, I will introduce my two guests. So Niamh, if you want to wave your arm, Chief Information Officer at NHS Resolution, with us, Niamh, and we'll also hear from Roddis, Digital Director at Old Kettering. That's the way they call the hospital, but I don't see Ian here yet. So we'll wait for him in a bit. So to start, let me give you a bit of context about who we are. I'm sure you've heard about NHSX. As an organization, we help transform the English National Health Service and social care using digital technology. And the NHS AI Lab is one of the constituent parts of NHSX. Now, my boss, Linda Joshi, you see on this slide, will be on the health stage tomorrow at 11 a.m. To give you an in-depth look at all the AI Lab programs. But to summarize, the lab's mission is to make sure that whenever the healthcare system wishes to adopt AI-driven technology, it can do so safely, ethically, and effectively. And the AI Skunkworks team is one of the hands-on arms among, let's say, the programs of the lab. We were set up to deliver rapid AI innovation based on proof of concepts. Now, for the very few of you who don't know the story of the name Skunkworks, well, this comes from the 1940s. And it comes from when Lockheed was asked by the US Air Force to build a new fighter aircraft in order to compete with the, let's say, advanced airplanes of the German Luftwaffe. So Lockheed took this weird new approach. Small group of engineers assigned with this single task of building a prototype, set them apart from the rest of the factory in a walled-off section, and let them loose to experiment with novel and advanced features. And their effort produced the guy in this slide, the P-38 Lightning, which was one of the most advanced aircrafts of its age. Now, this team was called the Skunkworks. It's the name that Lockheed uses today. And it became synonymous with rapid and agile innovation. And that's pretty much the idea that we've taken. So we are a small, agile, multidisciplinary team. We are data scientists, technologists, practitioners, project managers, and we all work together, hands-on, with organizations in the NHS ecosystem to help them engage with this new thing called artificial intelligence. And by working together towards tangible products, we somehow take the magic out of AI. We make it more accessible. And I love to say we hold hands with colleagues in the system who embrace the AI journey and help them with our capability. And so the term Skunkworks for us refers to the rapid, to the agile approach, to the fact we're testing speculative ideas. We're trying to address well-defined problems. But the term also refers to the fact that we are comfortable with failure. Our goal is to succeed and pass on the products of that success, or to share the lessons that we learned about something that didn't work. And in the process, we help the NHS workforce acquire the new skills required to deal with AI. So how do we find these problems? Well, we do a bit of horizon scanning. We do engagement with organizations in the NHS ecosystem, but we also have a few community-driven initiatives. In fact, the program itself was launched in 2020 with a pilot of a crowdsourcing event. We ran what we can define a Dragon's Den style pitching event to select problems to then resource. And it was so popular that we now rolled out more rounds or public calls. And this process is really good because it allows us to build a conversation with the community, regardless of whether they come with a pitch or not at the end of it. But while we're doing it, we are building that community of practice and starting conversation that support, but also question and challenge the adoption of AI and clarify all the misconceptions and hype around it. We are also creating a SWOT-like function for AI capability as a service, or so to say, which is offered to the health and care system as a way to explore the rapid definition of problems and the potential for AI to address them. Now, before we kick off the conversation with Niamh and Ian on what's it like to work to us, let me just show you a couple of projects that we're running at the moment. And so we have this team from Gloucestershire Hospitals who came to us to try and model the length of hospital stays. Now, the idea here is to look at how to forecast and manage long stays. This is a very important problem because it affects both the patient, people who are going to stay in hospital for a long time, and the hospital in terms of resources. Long-term stays usually have worse outcomes. They are associated with higher mortality. So the ability to better predict and manage these patients can lead to better outcomes. And in this case, we're working with a supplier called Polygeist on developing a generative adversarial network. I like to say that word. It's a neural network, a modern architecture for neural network. And we're using this to develop a live system for forecasting, which is a very novel application of such technology. And another project we just started is about comparing CT scans. You see that on the right. CT scans are basically slices of X-rays. And this is a matching in aligning them is a labor-intensive task for which there is no current automation tool. And the major difficulty here is aligning scans accurately when overlaying them on top of one another makes it difficult for radiologists sometimes to measure changes in the volume of lesions. And there is an estimate out there that says that the radiologists sometimes miss up to 30% of growth when viewing scans in a single plane. So the benefit of a project like this is the contribution to earlier detection or potentially life-threatening conditions, along with gaining time saving. Some of our projects actually are non-clinical, and they're not without their difficulty. We're working with the London talent team of the NHS England to address the question, can we use AI to help shortlist candidates while controlling bias? And we're working with them and our own AI Labs ethics team in order to learn if this is possible at all. Now, let me just close by summarizing what Skunkworks is. So these are our fundamental pillars. Experimentation through rapid projects, creating capability that we can then provide to the healthcare system, and building a community of AI practitioners in health and care. And by working together, we aim to test, learn, and share. And this is important because we want to understand whether AI can provide solution. We're open to the possibility of occasional failures. We will share successes and failure because we think that by doing this, we can learn something about the safe adoption of AI and improve the overall approach to AI in the NHS ecosystem. And with that, I think it's time to move on to our conversation. And I see Ian has actually joined us. I'm very happy to see him with us. So to get started, I think, let me introduce, well, actually, let's allow you to introduce yourselves. Niamh, you're going to go first.
Sure. Very nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me, Giuseppe. So Niamh McKenna, I'm the CIO for NHS Resolution. We handle claims and litigations on behalf of the NHS.
And Ian.
Hi all, I'm Ian Roddis. I'm Digital Director at little Old Kettering General Hospital.
I love that name. So we both work together on Skunkworks projects, and this conversation is about that. So let's start with Niamh. Niamh, we ran a project together about a problem that is not, let's say, the most cheerful of problems. Tell us something about it.
Sure. So the vast majority of what we do every year, the NHS procedures and so on are incredibly safe and go without any incident whatsoever. But a very small number every year, something can go wrong. And we handle those, claims for compensation on behalf of the rest of the NHS. And now one of the things that's really important is that we try and make sure we learn from any things that have gone wrong. And so trying to understand what's gone wrong, why it's gone wrong is really important. But the other thing is that this money that is spent every year on compensation, if we can learn and then prevent harm, so we can start predicting or understanding linkages between other data and claims data, we might be able to avoid patient harm by using external data to better predict claims. So that's what we were trying to do, and just explore if there was data out there that we, that is collected, that might help us understand if there's a relationship between that data and claims.
And why did you come up, why did you came to us, basically? What was attractive about Skunkworks? Because this came from a conversation you had with, let's say, my predecessor. It was not the Dragon's Den type of thing.
No, in fact, it was with Indra. When I very first started, I was just talking to lots of different people as part of my kind of induction and learning process. And I spoke to Indra. And in fact, she had the idea. She said, I think we can do something. We have an awful lot of data, but we as an organization are very small, and we hadn't got any experience of doing anything with AI before. And we also didn't really quite know how to aggregate some of the data that we wanted with NHS Digital. And so what was really helpful about Skunkworks is that you were able to provide us a sort of a whole guide through this process. We were going through something we'd never done before. We didn't even know if it would work. And so what you gave us was a safe space to try it, provided expertise with us in terms of guiding us how the process would work, selecting some of the organizations that we worked with and so on. But most importantly, there was no expectation that we would come out with an answer and go, ta-da, this is the answer. It was about the safe space to learn if this was going to work. We genuinely didn't know if it was something that was going to bear fruit or not.
And interestingly, we use this different approach. We call this organization called ACE, Accelerated Capability Environment, which is an home office agency that brings a supplier but also technical delivery. And it was very interesting because I think this was the first time we used them for a project. And it was very interesting to see working on a 12 weeks project, how intense that was, but also how much insight that brought. How did you find that? Was that very intensive?
It was quite intensive from our side, but it was very well guided. And so that's really, when you're starting out on a journey, having someone who can kind of hold your hand and say, well, we've done this before, and actually what you need to do is think about this, or, there's a data governance, IG considerations, data sharing, even just the technology to get our data into this kind of trusted environment was much helped by the fact that, ACE, as being part of the Home Office, had done it all before, were able to give us all the reassurance around security, data deletion, and they'd thought through all of this. I'm sure we could have done it. It would have just taken us a lot longer if we'd had to do it completely on our own.
Wonderful. Ian, moving on to little Old Kettering. We worked together at the beginning of the pandemic when, a lot of extra needs came through to hospital. What was the story?
Yeah, so you can imagine Acute Hospital Trust at the time was an interesting place to work. I joined in March, about 2-3 weeks before we actually entered the pandemic. The hospital was very busy, and it was an interesting time. If you know anything about little Old Kettering, you may well not. It's a traditional acute local hospital. Through the last 14-15 months, we've gone from almost 0 miles per hour to 100 miles per hour or kilometers per hour in our use of digital technology, and that was all about meeting the needs of the time. And it's an unfortunate sentence to say so, but we kind of took advantage of the opportunities presented to us, and that's not in a kind of self-interested way, but in a we were encountering new problems. You couldn't take weeks and months going with solutions to them. You needed it as soon as possible, you needed it as safely as possible, and you needed it as securely as possible. And as part of that, we're working on some interesting projects at the moment around clinical coding and what I call bed Tetris, how we model bed management in the hospital. But at the time, COVID brought a massive demand for information, both to know how we were doing at a local level within Kettering and Northampton, but also Leicester. So if you think about it, the NHS is a system. So patients were moving between hospitals, staff were moving between hospitals, and we had to think how best we could meet the demand. But one of the big demands at the time around information was about understanding that COVID situation. So what was the status of the hospital? How many patients did we have, in what state, even down to how many beds we had and how well served were they for oxygen. So obviously a big part of COVID was a massive demand to have patients have available oxygen. And we also had to report on workforce data. So how many staff were present, how many were ill, and how was that looking over time? Because you've got a demand and you've got the need to meet that demand. And that's often with staff. It was also with machines, ventilators, and also the quality of your piped oxygen. So we had an obligation, every hospital had an obligation to produce a COVID sit-rep report, 11 a.m. each day. So locally, but more importantly, I think nationally, folks could know how the country was doing in our response to COVID. And where we started this conversation with NHSX and the AI Lab was around how could we automate that gathering of data? Because it was new. You had bits of paper around the hospital, people giving updates real time. And you had data from different systems, our patient admin systems, but also our HR workforce systems. So you've got a wide range of data to be brought together. It was critical, it was accurate. And I would say it was a candidate ripe for automation. And that's where we started our conversation with X. And for me, the benefits of doing this was, one, it saved staff time. And it meant staff, rather than worrying about this paper, calling up wards, getting data out of HR systems, staff could put that time back to support patient in whatever kind, whether it was the admin or direct face-to-face care. For me, it reduced risk, and parallel to that, it improved quality. So if we automated the data, if we had data in systems, if folks understood where and how to report the data, it means our robot, who's called Marybot, could go and gather that data and streamline the whole report into the national system.
Ian, let me stop you there. Actually, just to mention, we can actually tweet the case studies we produced for both of this project, which might be of interest. But the key question here that the most informed people attending the session will probably have is, this is not quite AI, but that was the beginning of a journey for Kettering. And then how did that work? And moving from robots into intelligent automation into AI.
Yeah, so what you're starting to do is change mindsets and change the culture. You know, when I started talking robots at Kettering, it took about 5 seconds before folks talked about Terminator and Skynet taking over the world. And obviously we had our little cartoon images of metal robots. But actually, as folks started to see what automation technology could do, it started raising the question about what AI could start to do. So the projects we're looking at now is how can we use technology to support clinical coding. Clinical coding is quite a specific thing, but it's about how you, any patient that goes into a hospital has a treatment done, all of those treatments are coded, and you can start to use NLP to start making some almost judgment calls with human validation around how can you code a procedure, particularly if you've got a patient with complex issues, and how can you almost start to predict what other treatments may be happening or may need to be happening. And we're also starting to look at bed management. If you think about a hospital, you have a front door, patients come in, they either walk or come in an ambulance or referred, and you have a back door. People leave hopefully after successful treatment. And in the middle of that state, just as we had last night, your demand often is greater than your capacity. And so understanding what patients may or may not be discharged, freeing up beds, and understanding what capacity may come in at the front door, you can start to use AI to predict that demand. You can start to, I'm going to say, mash together a bunch of data sets. So what season are you in? What's the incidence of, in this state, COVID or flu or cold or any other kind of thing. So what we want to do is start really using that data to predict and help almost model how we manage our estate. Because throughput and flow is a really big deal in a hospital. And clinical coding, being able to help AI to almost predict the treatments we're doing and report on them to national states. So going back to your question, Giuseppe, it's about changing mindsets. It's about folks understanding the potential and thinking about these kind of technologies for problems folks face every day.
That's very interesting. I think that the project around bed management, clearly shows how AI can have a potential impact on patient without necessarily being a clinical problem per se. And that also brings me back to Niamh, in terms of, what do you think a project like the one we run together could mean for patients further down the line? Question one. And question two, did that help in any way making a case internally for a project like this? And that's a question, and then probably I'll bring Ian in again.
Yeah, so I mean, the nirvana is that we do find some information that helps us understand the causes of harm, and that helps to improve patient safety. That's absolutely critical, and that's the mission. Nobody in the NHS wants anything to go wrong. It can happen, and often people are, clinicians are really keen to understand what went wrong so they can avoid it in the future. So if we can find links between data, if we can find things, markers or indicators, then we can actually take material actions to improve patient safety. And that's what we all want to do. And that was, that's absolutely the holy grail for us. And that's, in a way, the idea of this is something that we have been keen in NHS Resolution to do for a while. The challenge is crunching through those big data sets is too big a task for anything other than AI, because we don't know exactly what data is relevant. As you know, there is so much data out there. You could look at things like, the number of complaints, waiting times, staff sickness levels. There's lots of theories out there, but you really need to crunch it out on mass level in order to see if there's a potential correlation. And then if you see a potential correlation, you then have to go through the work to see if there's a cause, if that's actually a causal relationship, not just a coincidence. So absolutely, that's what we want to do. That's the idea. And I was quite cautious in our business case to say we're just testing this to see if it's something that's worth exploring. And so actually, again, Giuseppe working with Skunkworks is really helpful, because I think we could kind of point to this is like a proof of concept rather than a big project that's going to require lots of time, energy, and we guarantee some outcomes. That's the biggest mindset change for me in terms of leadership. We're not going to guarantee an outcome. We're just trying something to see if it works.
Interestingly, NHS Resolution is probably an organization that is sort of used to deal with information. While I'm just wondering if Ian can say something about what's that like in a hospital. I mean, clearly it is a big hospital relatively, but it's still a hospital, not necessarily a place where data or technology is the first thing in people's minds.
No, absolutely. Hospitals are still very hands-on places. We've got an ambitious digital strategy. We want to be the most digitally enabled group by 2023, but actually hospitaling, as it were, is still very hands-on, the actual physical patient care. And bringing in concepts like working in an agile fashion, the idea of Skunkworks, even the idea of working in an agile way, which delivers maybe a discovery and alpha beta live. Folks want live right now, they want benefits and value. Just going back to the business case, I'm going to say it almost wrote itself, but that's probably unfair to the bunch of work we put into it. And there was a number of key reasons why it was actually, for me, a very easy thing to write. I think working with NHSX and Skunkworks is really important, that external validation, the ability to show that you're working at a national level, that you're picking up, I'm going to say, Giuseppe, I'm not being flattering, but working with the best, little Old Kettering, working at a national level, working with national teams and suppliers. Being part of that bigger picture was really important for us as part of the business case. So part of the case showed that there were a range of trusts already working in this way, doing it, that there was the potential for sharing. And obviously from what we did initially with the COVID sit rep and what we're doing with clinical coding and bed Tetris, is that we're part of one big NHS family. So hopefully work we can do working with the national level can be of benefit for other trusts and vice versa. There's a phrase, pinch with pride. So share once across the NHS. This is all public sector money. So once you start painting that big picture of the national centre, of building on work that others may have done and or contributing back, and then you get into the internal measures of success, as it were. So one is the time saved, and yes, we did use a salary equivalent number as a proxy of time saved. But for me, very conscious that it's saving time to put back into patient care. And the two other key measures of me are those that pairing of quality and risk. Robots may make mistakes, but it's less likely they will. And making less mistakes reduces the risks and improves the quality. So that for me was, and there was that element of support from the centre. It's always good to show that it's not just little old Kettering footing the bill from our allocation of budget, but that central support also helps, tip the decision making with your director of finance.
So the big elephant in the room here, of course, is data. And, we all know information governance, data security, data protection, all these concepts are really important to make sure that we respect people's privacy and we keep the trust. But on the other hand, there's sometimes difficult processes to navigate to get to do something like this. What was the experience? I mean, once again, different issues here in Kettering and in NHS resolution. Niamh, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So, I think there was a few different things for us. One was actually the IG journey. We were putting data in a secure environment, very secure environment, but it was just not a process we'd ever gone through before. So educating people on what we were doing, how we were doing, and how we were going to take care of data was really important. The other thing was obviously we were using a lot of publicly available data, data provided by NHS Digital. And actually, it's like anything, getting under the skin of that and trying to understand, if there was zeros, did that mean just there was a nil return that month? Did it mean that actually someone forgot to make a submission that month, etc.? So a lot of cleansing and trying to get, normalize the data. And of course, in our case, we have to do an awful lot of kind of, shall we say, normalization of data, because a big trust or a small trust might have different volumes of claims, and that's perfectly normal. And so how do you surface out the nuggets of information from the data noise was another really big activity. And just going through that journey ourselves with the suppliers and ACE was really helpful, I think, just as an education process, if nothing else, in terms of the next time we go through anything like this, we'll have a much better understanding of the sorts of things we need to do. But it all takes longer. I knew that data was really important, and it still took longer than I thought to get that bit right. Thank
you. Ian, what's that like, Kettering?
So actually three things to talk about. So one is we love data. We have an astounding health intelligence team. We've got grand ambition for how we're going to be using data within Northamptonshire. And we're marching into the cloud. We're using Power BI. But in terms of these projects, there's a couple of interesting things to think about. So one is the data sharing agreement between the local trust and the national centre. So what's the dynamic and the balance of relationship between Kettering is a foundation trust in its own right, but we were working with NHS AI and X. So there was something interesting about those data sharing agreements between local and national. And I think the really interesting thing as you march into automation and AI is our kind of social contract with our staff and our patients and the communities we serve. So we all publish privacy policies. We talk about IG, we talk about DPIA, we talk about freedom of information requests. But that was in a world before robots or AI came out on scene. So we know as we go forward, this whole sharing understanding of what we may be doing with these technologies, talking about what a human may do with your data and so on, and what penalties there may be if a human goes rogue is one thing, but explaining that a robot or artificial intelligence, which is in effect software, will also be accessing data, maybe transporting it, maybe mashing it up, maybe sharing it. How do we have that conversation with the folks we serve to explain in a privacy setting, in a ethical setting? You can put a human being in jail, you can't put a robot in jail. So I think the data sharing you can just work through. I think that social contract with where and what we may be doing with data, it's been a hot topic in the news recently, but I think going forward there's just some work to be done to explain that better, to get that engagement, to get that social contract in place.
Yeah, no, I think actually that's very important. The conversation about the social contract has been entirely missing from the public conversation on anything around data and AI. And I think, my hope is that by working intensely on Skunkworks over the next 3 or 4 years, we will try and bring that conversation in. And meanwhile, I see questions are starting to flow in the session. And please do ask questions, that they are very welcome. Just to get started, there's someone asking if in the prediction of bed demand in hospitals, we're using tools from Palantir, and whether the tools developed in-house, whether we are developing tools in-house or whether we rely on others for part of this work. Ian, what tools are you using for bed management at the moment? And then I'll tell what's the plan on my side.
So we use a range, and not unfortunately because it's demand, so we still range from paper, spreadsheets, and I guess every day we use a patient admin system. We have lovely whiteboards, we can see bed states. So there's a range of things that helps manage, and it's really organic, it's really reactive, it's really on the ground. What we don't yet do is real operational predictive management. We've done a bunch of work as part of every hospital to think about reset post-COVID. What do we expect the demand to be? What capacity, whether that's for elective surgery or for outpatient appointments and so on. But that day-to-day management of what's happening, how many ambulances are outside, how many respiratory illnesses do we expect to see? Last night our emergency department was full with kids actually with respiratory issues. So at the moment we use the tools we have, but as we want to get much more predictive inputs and outputs, for me, just starting on this journey, I'm going to hand over to you, Giuseppe, because I don't think we've made any tools other than we will have some principles of it all being open source. We will be looking to share, and we will be looking to learn from best practice elsewhere. And we all love a good Twittering, and I think it's been great so far, Giuseppe, to share with what folks are doing, and we'll be using other networks as we go forward. But the aim is to be open source, and I believe, Giuseppe, we will not be dependent on any single solution or supplier.
No. Well, that's the thing. I think given this project is still in its infancy, it's like in scoping phase. But the point for us is that when we run these projects, we tend to develop tools and to use open source libraries as much as we can. And then you'll see there's something called the data lens we have developed and shared, and we'll always do things this way. So sometimes it might be that we will be using existing tools wherever they are, but the plan for us is always to make sure that our data pipelines, data tools, anything that actually is reusable and reshareable gets reshared. And this is exactly one of those examples in which this can happen. I have to say, I keep banging on about open source. The reception in general is positive. And it's positive both from colleagues in the NHS, but also from the companies we've engaged with. On the side of that, as I said, we're also developing our own capability, with data developers, data scientists, data engineers, and that will also increase clearly the number of tools that we develop in-house, as NHSX is doing. That's very project specific, though. I mean, actually, I'd like here to get Niamh back in, because there are questions around, the Dragon's Den. So I shouldn't really call it the Dragon's Den because it makes it more competitive. We're trying to make it collaborative. But you've been a dragon. You've been a judge. How was it?
It was great, actually. I have to say that there was the level of ideas that were coming through and the enthusiasm that people were putting in was really rewarding. I think, and I would say, because there was a bunch of us that were judges, we were even ones that we didn't actually take forward for whatever reason. There were others that we were like, oh, that's really good, but we think something else might help there. So I would say, as judges, it was almost like no idea was a bad idea. We tried to provide feedback for everyone. I thought the quality and kind of depth of the applications was excellent. So it was really encouraging, actually. And sometimes I think in public sector, people sort of beat themselves up a bit for not being innovative or forward thinking. I mean, I say no, and I'm sure Ian will agree. Yes, of course, there's challenges, but there's no shortage of ideas. There's no shortage of people out there trying to innovate and trying to do new and interesting things.
And I have to say, one of the outcomes of the Dragon's Den, of course, is we have to select 2 or 3 projects to move forward, and that's clearly, the limitation of our resources. But then we start conversations with all the other, let's say, applicants, and we actually are exploring how to help them, whether with, we bring them in to run a full project, or sometimes with advisory, sometimes with helping them building tools. Sometimes that's about building enabling tools, or bringing them together, which actually puts me, again, Mr. Roddis, in the spot, because you came to us with an idea at the Dragon's Den about clinical coding, and we said, hold on, we like that idea, but we're seeing someone else doing something similar. Can we work it all together? So it's also about, bringing collaboration in. How do you feel about that degree of openness and sharing between different trusts?
Love it, Giuseppe. Just love it. I mean, for us, we're part of one NHS, and I think when I said pinch with pride or share freely, it's at the heart of what we do. If you follow myself on Twitter or Andy Callow, the group CDIO, or read our blogs, we're growing that culture of being open within the trust, and it's been really pleasing recently to see folks who've been working in the trust in digital portfolio years to finding their voice. Just blogging. Jazz Sagu's been writing out our journey to cloud, and so we're trying to breed that culture. We love the GDS standards. We love NHS digital standards. Work in the open because it makes things better. And I'm going to talk about the dirty subject of money. Money is tight in the NHS. It always is. We're coping with demands for efficiencies, and so I think trying to do it within a single trust, the numbers just don't add up. With the group model in Northamptonshire, we've got an element of a bit of an economy of scale. But if you're looking across the whole NHS, being able to do these innovations, being able to bring mindsets into local trusts which maybe have not been there before, so where it's artificial intelligence or service design or user-centered design, I think you can only do those kind of things by working in a non-silo base, not just a single hospital trust. It may be a group or it may be national. So I think, Giuseppe, in all our conversations, we're up for it. We're up for sharing widely, talking at events like this, and we're up for sharing our solutions, open source, using modern development technologies, sharing the code, and so on and so on. I think it's just what we want to do is build it just as part of our DNA in Kettering.
That's great. I mean, we're actually having some very interesting questions, so little time to answer them all. We have a question about how do we escape the proof of concept trap? And I'd say we don't. All we do here, from a Skunkworks point of view, is to get to a proof of concept. And the plan for us, the real goal is to make sure that we share as much as possible the skills and the understanding about AI, so that the system in 3-4 years' time, is able to take those choices independently, whether it is about building or buying or whatever else. So in reality, all we are interested in is a proof of concept. But then, of course, we keep the door open and the conversation open about supporting that journey into scaling. Actually, that brings me to probably ask both of you, what are the next steps? How do you operationalize what you learned? Niamh, do you want to go first?
Well, I suppose our next step is to almost extend that proof of concept. So it was a teaser, right? So we found some things that looked really interesting. We didn't get a chance to look at everything we wanted. And so we want to finish it almost and look at other data sets and then start to identify things where we'll go and investigate that correlation to causation relationship. So it feels to us very much like step one of the journey, and there's just a lot of different things we want to go and look at now.
And for me, terms like proof of concept or discovery, at which one of the outcomes might be you don't proceed, are interesting terms to use in a local trust. I'm very comfortable with them in my previous roles. It's been a part of our journey. But in a local trust, if you're spending £1, you want to get your value back. But so there's something interesting when you say park, I say whatever, first iteration, So there's something interesting in the trust, how you talk about those things. But for me, it's all about delivering a solution, learning from it, iterating, releasing value, and scaling over time. I think for me, there's an interesting translation job when you talk about POC and how you move to scaling. By nature, I'm a product owner, I'm a product manager. So if I understand the vision, where we want to be, what our roadmap is, the POC is one step on that journey. And I may describe it slightly different to different audiences. But for me, that idea of product management, that idea of agile delivery, that idea of iteration, but keeping a vision true to where you want to be and having a roadmap to get there is how I make sense of this within a local acute trust.
Great. Well, while we wait to close the session, we have 30 seconds to go. Do you think the Skunkworks model should be replicated internally in an organization?
So for me, absolutely. So some of the things we're not grappling with, but how can you have that innovation or incubator hub model, you know? So in an acute trust in almost all organizations, everyone's going to be flat out. You're going to be busy. You've got problems of the day. But how do you grow that incubation hub? How do you create that space for discovery? I think it's got to be something we have to do, and having that idea of you can try something and you can fail, and you know what, that's okay. And I think that's why it's really important that folks like NHSX and the Skunkworks work with the localities to grow that culture, grow that mindset.
Thank you. I think it's time for us to close this session. So let me just thank everyone for attending, and especially Niamh and Ian for being my guests today. It's been an interesting conversation. Don't forget, if you work in the healthcare ecosystem, just get in touch with us. We're happy to support your journey. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye, all.
And a big thank you from me. What a fabulous session. I love the range of discussion where you went from sort of paper and bed sheets all the way through to AI back again. I couldn't agree more that we need to bring the general public into this conversation too. So thank you all. And I hope that next year you'll come back and see us, because I can already feel the innovation that you will be able to tell us all about then. And I like the idea of try something and fail, but keep trying again. So thank you very much, everybody. I'll see you all soon. And back to you watching at home. Thank you for joining. Fuel yourselves for the latter half. We will return with some remarkable cutting-edge trailblazers, including Max Tegmark, Stuart Russell, Kate Callett. I mean, it's going to be super. Jess Wade, who I told you from Imperial, will be back to be your guide for the day. So all that really leads me to say is head over, explore the virtual expo booths, meet people in the networking area, share insights on your favorite social media platform, but most importantly, enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.